For the last two segments, we're going to be joined by Mike Detty. He has experience in the arms trade, specifically with Operation Wide Receiver that became Operation Fast and Furious. He has written a book, Guns Across the Border, How and Why the U.S. Government Smuggled Guns into Mexico. And we've got a couple callers that have been waiting, so if you want to hold on, we may be able to get your calls in the last segment with Mike Detty. But let's bring in Mike. Now, Mike, I want to get a background. Tell us about your story. Tell us about the content of this book and your experience in Operation Wide Receiver.
Sure, Owen. My experience in working with the government started in 2006 when I had some suspicious customers make purchases of firearms from me. And I immediately relayed those, the information regarding those purchases to the ATF office in Tucson. And rather than just turn over the information and walk away from it, they had an interesting proposal, and that was to have me work with them to help lead an investigation into illegal trafficking into Mexico, which is what I suspected they were involved in. Initially, I was told it would last a couple weeks. It ended up lasting 3 years. I actually sold to 5 different cartels or families in Mexico over the course of that 3 years, usually from my living room. It had a tragic ending that no one really foresaw, especially me, but it ended with Brian Terry, the Border Patrol agent, being killed with a gun from Fast and Furious. And when that happened, ATF and Department of Justice came out and both said that they'd never allowed traffic guns to enter Mexico. And I knew that just not to be true. And I knew that they were lying as part of a cover-up. And that's when I decided to make my story public.
Now, I just want to be clear. So it sounds like they come to you, they tell you that essentially you're going to be helping in a sting operation, the good guy, to try to bring these people in who's ever dealing these arms. And then once they've used you enough really to just smuggle these arms, they really never planned on bringing anybody in, then they burn you.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. I was exposed as a confidential informant. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to understand why they would do that. With me out of the picture, they could have portrayed me as somebody they were investigating. I certainly would have been portrayed as a honest patriot that thought he was helping his government take down a drug cartel.
Well, and you probably did something that I don't know if they're used to dealing with. You took paper records and you had your own personal account of many of the transactions that were made. And so you were able to keep tracing some of the serial numbers on these guns. And as you said, eventually you found out the tragic story that one of the guns that you were involved with trafficking ended up being used to kill the Border Patrol agent. So what happened when they tried to burn you and you had all this evidence? Is that what led you to write the book?
Right. Just a correction. It was actually a Fast and Furious gun, not a wide receiver gun that killed Brian Terry. Not that that matters. The important thing here is ATF's denial of them letting guns into Mexico unimpeded, really. And the whole purpose was to flood Mexico with as many American guns as possible so that they could push for a new assault weapons ban here in the United States. It was never about taking down a cartel, as they told me. There were plenty of chances for them to do that, and plenty of chances actually to seize millions and millions of dollars of Mexican drug money. And they set that all aside just to have American guns show up at Mexican crime scenes in an effort to push public sentiment for new legislation here that would have impeded honest gun owners like you and me.
So it's amazing when you tell this story because you have all the facts, you have all the evidence, you wrote the book Guns Across the Border, and obviously based on your account how the real motive was gun legislation, taking guns from Americans, law-abiding citizens, well, then that means there's higher powers at play. Before I go down that road, though, again, I'm just kind of curious, just in a little more detail, how did you get started? I mean, how did you end up getting in this situation to begin with the ATF? What was your background that led you into that operation when they set you up on the fake sting operation?
Sure. I was a gun dealer in Tucson, Arizona, and I dealt mostly at gun shows. I didn't have a retail shop. I just did the gun shows. I sold mostly AR-15s and semi-automatic AK-47s. And I was approached by a customer at one particular show, and he wanted to buy five AR-15s, all exactly the same. He passed the background check. He paid cash. And he asked me if I had more of the particular guns that he bought. And I said, you know, you bought the last one I had, but I've got 20 more coming next week. And he said, I'll take them all. And that's just not normal. I mean, lots of people own more than one AR-15, but usually they have one for coyote hunting, one for home defense, one for this or that. They don't buy all exactly the same. Not often do they pay all cash for it. So it seems suspicious to me. So I took that information to the Tucson office of ATF. And after I put that information in their lap, I thought I would walk away. And instead they said, you know, would you mind making a call for us, and can we record it? And then would you mind selling these 20 more guns to this individual, because we'd like to surveil it, we'd like to follow him. And I didn't see either of those things being particularly dangerous for me to do. And I kind of felt duty bound as a licensed dealer to help them. So I did that. And that started the ball rolling. And then the next purchase was at my house, and it was for, you know, 20 or more, again, of the same thing. And that continued for about 6 months. And then there was a new player that was introduced by one of the acquaintances of a person I was already dealing with. And this person was better connected and better funded, and they would buy 50 of this or 50 of that. And that's when things started to get really crazy for me.
This is quite a story. So they basically set you up as the middleman to wipe their hands of it, told you it'd be a sting. It was never a sting. It was all about political power in the United States. And you were kind of caught in the middle of this, just doing what you thought was an honest service. And then they burned you, act like they had no idea who you were. Now, I want to move on to a new aspect about something that you talk about. How when you were doing these deals and you had potential buyers coming to you, how you would set up a showroom. Talk about that.
Yeah, you know, I was a divorced guy, so I didn't have a lot of furniture in my living room, so I didn't mind setting up guns there in the living room. And on any particular evening, I might have, say, 25 different variations of AK-47, semi-automatic AK-47s, 5 or more different styles of AR-15s, 38 Supers, all the type of guns that they were interested in. And what I would do is I would stack the boxes, and then I would take the top box, open that, and I would put the rifle on top. So the idea was to let them know, excuse me, how many guns I had, or that I had a large number of guns. So if they said, I want 10 of this and 5 of that, excuse me, that they'd be able to walk out the door with them.
It's okay. Hold it right there, because we got to go to a break. We are speaking to Mike Detty. He is the author of the book Guns Across the Border. He's telling his story about how he was set up as an arms dealer as part of a fake sting. We'll be right back with more. All right, folks, final segment of the War Room here. warroom.show for all of our content, InfoWarsStore.com to support us. We're joined by Mike Detty. He is the author of Guns Across the Border. He's sharing his experience right now when he was working under Operation Wide Receiver. I bring Mike Detty back in. Now, Mike, you were just talking about how you would set up a showroom type of situation when you were getting ready to sell some of these arms, and you would put stuff out. Now, it's been speculated that Stephen Paddock may have also been an arms dealer, and this could have been a arms deal gone bad, terribly bad, obviously. To just leave it right there with that kind of basic premise, was that something that ever crossed your mind, or had you ever thought that Stephen Paddock could have possibly been an arms dealer or anything like that when you were hearing these speculations?
I've heard some of those reports, and the one thing that rings true is that one of the police officers, when interviewed, said when they entered that it looked more like a showroom in a gun store than a hotel room. my way of thinking is that if he was just there to create mayhem, that he would have had those guns all right by the windows he was firing from, stacked up right there, not spread around the room. And if he thought it was a suicide mission, he was going to be killed eventually. I think his goal would have been to just shoot as many people as possible. That's why I don't think he would have placed the guns around the room. I think he would have had them right there.
And again, Mike is talking about how the guns were scattered about the room. We've seen that in the leaked photos. It doesn't really make sense where the guns are located, where the magazines are located. Do we have Mike back, guys? All right, so yeah, you were just talking about how they were saying how it looked more like a showroom for guns instead of somebody shooting, and we've talked about that. I completely concur with your analysis of the photos. It doesn't make sense if he was there to just kill a bunch of people the way everything was laid out. But I just had a couple of questions for you, too. When you were making these arms deals, you talked about how most of the time you would do it at your house. What about hotels? Did you ever use hotels? Did you ever try to use crowded events or casinos to help some of this go smoothly? Was that something that you ever experienced?
No, and the reason we never did that was they had to be surveilled. There were always agents nearby that were watching and recording. I wore a recorder myself, and there was a transmitter in one of my pockets. And sometimes we had a video recorder.
I'm sorry, I got to stop you right there. Mike, you're breaking news right now. You're telling me that when you would do these arms deals, you would record it?
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay, folks, we have a former arms dealer telling us he used to record his transactions. Of course, we heard that there were 4 videos set up recording while Stephen Paddock was in the room. Mike, I give it back to you. What are your thoughts?
You know, it's hard for me to say. I wasn't directly involved with anything in Las Vegas, so I don't know. But the fact that this gentleman set up some type of video system, was it to warn himself when the police were about to break down the door, or did he just want, was he sick enough that he wanted to make a history of what he was about to do to the humanity out there at the concert? Hard for me to say. Or was he trying to protect himself in some way by doing something illegal, or he had been asked to do something illegal for his government and wanted to make a recording of it?
So just again, explain why you set up the cameras.
Well, ATF set up the cameras, but I also had recordings, and it wasn't, at the time I was involved, I wasn't recording to protect myself. Actually, they had asked me to do that with my own digital recorder because the quality was better than their transmitter. But what that also meant was that for me to bring them a CD of the buy that happened at my house, I would have to download that recorder onto my hard drive and then make a CD for them. But that also meant that I had duplicate records of each transaction.
I don't think anyone's reported on this before. Again, we're hearing from Mike Detty, the author of the book Guns Across the Border. He was set up in a gun-running fake sting operation, and he's telling us how it was common practice to have multiple recordings going of this for multiple reasons, obviously. But wow, that's just another weird tie to this deal. Mike isn't making any claims here. Mike, have you ever, would you ever deal in any explosives, or did you ever hear about any other arms dealers dealing with explosives such as tannerite or other things of that nature?
No, but there was somebody that ATF dealt with for the Fast and Furious operation that was making hand grenades and taking them across the border. I believe that was in Texas, maybe in El Paso. A quick Google, you'd find that individual's name. He wasn't arrested for a very long time. In fact, it looked as though ATF gave him a pass, and it makes me wonder if he wasn't doing that at the direction of ATF.
Well, Mike, you know, I'm just glad that you're willing to share this experience. Now, obviously, you wrote this book a long time ago. Your experience comes from years ago. This isn't something that you've just cropped up overnight because you're trying to act like an expert on the Vegas shooting. I just wanted to get your expertise on what you experienced arms dealing. So just you know, basically, again, I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but what do you think about this Vegas shooting? You know, what are you thinking? What are you hearing? What were the first things that came into your head?
The very first thing, Tucson time, I woke up 2:30 in the morning because I had to get up early that day to travel to an event in Colorado. I turned on the news, and the first thing I heard was the recordings of the gun being fired. I'm not an expert on acoustics. I'm not an expert on terror, but I do know a lot about guns. And when I heard that audio, I said, that's got to be a .30 caliber belt-fed weapon. So I was very surprised the next day when they came out and said it was an AR-15 outfitted with a bump fire stock. I've been around those products. I never viewed them as anything more serious than toys because they're difficult to run. And it's very difficult to dump an entire round of 30 rounds, much less 90 rounds, almost impossible without starting and stopping, starting and stopping. The audio that I heard wasn't like that. It had a very solid cadence to it, which led me to believe it was a belt-fed machine gun. It also sounded more like a .30 caliber than a .556. Again, you know, hearing the audio on TV and everything, I could kind of make that fit, but the cyclic rate, which sounded between 600 and 700 rounds per minute, was far too slow for an auto AR-15.
Other than just your direct experience when they set you up as a middleman for a fake sting operation, have you ever experienced any CIA or FBI cover-ups other than gun operations that you were involved in?
No, fortunately, that's the only one I've been involved in and experienced.
Well, that's good for you, and obviously it was smart of you to kind of protect yourself by taking all of that data. I know that that wasn't exactly what you thought you'd have to use it for, but folks, Mike Detty is our guest. The book is Guns Across the Border, How and Why the U.S. Government Smuggled Guns into Mexico. Mike, we've got 60 seconds left. Is there any parting words you'd like to leave with our audience?
Well, I'd just like to tell your viewers, you know, I'm one of those people. I was never part of the tinfoil hat group or black helicopter group. I believed in my government. I did everything they asked me to do, really thinking I was doing my bit as a good citizen, as a good American. And that's why I didn't see coming what happened. It took me quite a bit of hindsight to figure out why they asked me to do certain things. As an informant, it wasn't my place to question them. But looking back, now I understand that the whole event that I was involved in was strictly to aid in their efforts to gain more gun control here in the United States.
And again, that would make sense. We know that the FBI sets these things up, sometimes just to prop themselves up as a reason for still existing. Mike Detty's been our guest. The book, Guns Across the Border, How and Why the U.S. Government Smuggled Guns into Mexico. Mike, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.